think Mulholland Drive is probably going to be one of them. The first time I saw it, I didn't even know what I watched, and now I think I get it. So Lord of the Rings for me, if I can't choose all three, is tough. How much would that drive you insane to only watch Fellowship and then it ends and you're like, "Eh." Really don't know why. I've just been like looking up videos about Back to the Future. I haven't watched it in years. So these are not like my favorite movies, but I could watch Back to the Future probably over and over and over and not get sick of it. These are movies that I've seen more times than I can count, so I think it's safe to say I'm not tired of them yet. Probably won't be anytime soon. I'm Mike Palumbo. I'm a filmmaker and a musician, and you're watching the Film Stock Podcast.
So listen, I want to kick this off because I'm very interested in your first choice. I just want to have a quick conversation about this because we're having this conversation almost on a weekly basis. And the conversation generally goes something to the effect of love David Lynch. Love everything he's about. Love him as a person, as a creative.
You do?
I do.
Sure.
I won't speak for Shawn, but I know that Ace feels the same way as I do. Love him. Love that he exists. Love that he's out there doing his thing. Can't stand his movies. Don't get them. Like, I don't know if they go over my head. Maybe I'm not understanding something, but like every time I sit down to watch his movies, and you even said this, I'm just like confused and like don't really know who greenlit this, but like clearly somebody greenlit it. Like movies are made by committee for the most part. Somebody had to have the purse strings and be like, let's open them. So like, why Mulholland Drive?
Well, first of all, I totally get that. Like I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to try to make you a believer or argue that David Lynch is like the greatest filmmaker or anything like that. If somebody doesn't like David Lynch, I get it. Like, it's sense. Not for everybody. You know?
Why do you like him? Like, what is about him that kind of attracts you to him?
Well, I think a lot of things. I mean, I'm somebody who I get kind of swept up in their like personal life too. Like I'm curious, like who are they? Like what you know? And I am kind of inspired by his story. You know, he got started a little later in life. He worked really hard to make Eraserhead and you know, on a shoestring budget, and it's just such a bizarre movie to work your ass off and basically risk your family and your livelihood for 4 years. It was 4?
I thought it was 1, but you're saying it was 4.
It took 4 years to make.
Holy shit.
I think. I mean, you know, Jamie, you want to pull that up?
Yeah.
I think it took about 4 years. It was very on and off. You know, it was a total passion project. I think I'm inspired by that side of him, like as an artist and somebody who's a purist and just like doesn't give up on his vision and doesn't. I'm sure he compromises in some way, but overall, I love that side of him. I love his kind of, you know, devotion to creativity and him as a person. I've read a couple of his books and stuff. And so I like him, but then the reason I like him is because I got into his movies first. So Mulholland Drive is the first movie of his I think I saw, and it's still my favorite. And the first time I saw it, I think certain movies or certain albums will stand out to me as something that there's nothing else like it. Like I've never seen or I've never heard something like this. And
you
those
can definitely say that about Mulholland Drive.
That's the thing that sticks out to me is like, wow, this kind of opened up a new part of my brain.
Sure.
I didn't know movies could be like this. Like I remember thinking things like that. And I was pretty young. I was like probably like 16. And I wasn't really ready for some of the themes. I didn't really quite get it. I wasn't quite as obsessed with doing the deep dive and the behind the scenes on YouTube and stuff as I am now. So I just watched it a few times. I showed it to friends, and a lot of my friends were convinced that there is no unlocking, or because in the DVD you open it and it has like clues, right? And it's like 12 secrets to unlocking Mulholland Drive.
I heard recently he just did that for like the French audience, but it was in such high demand that the studios came back to him and they were like, no, we got to do that and give it to everybody. Is that true?
So I don't know. I don't know about like if that's real. I don't know if those are clues, because my understanding of the movie, those kind of Easter eggs are not important.
They're not.
They are small clues, but ultimately, you know, we don't have to do like a deep dive on trying to like figure out what is going on in the movie. But basically, spoiler alert, there's 3/4 of the movie is is kind of one setting, is kind of one feel, and it's sort of idealistic LA, a woman arriving in LA all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and it's almost like B movie like weirdness in the beginning. There's like this awkward ADR, and there's like, it almost feels like you're watching something that's like not super well crafted at first, and like I remember thinking that it was just kind of like a weird old movie. 2001 was like an old movie to me when I was like a teenager. And I'm like, oh, this is just bizarre feeling. All of that is kind of, to my understanding, very intentional, and the movie opens with sort of like a point of view of like a head hitting the pillow, and it's pretty obvious that it's opening with giving you a feeling of either a dream or death or the afterlife or something to that effect. So to my understanding, that whole 3/4 of the movie is not real, so to speak, as the true characters. It's sort of a fantasy world.
Sure.
And then, those characters wake up, and the true, and that's where it starts to confuse people, because Naomi Watts is playing the same character as you've seen her as, this bright-eyed, beautiful actress, or wanting to be an actress, and everything seems to be working out for her, and she's falling in love, and she's getting this role, and this director is like immediately like loving her acting, and all these sort of idealistic things that are just like obviously unrealistic. But you're watching a movie, so you're like, I don't know about LA, but the truth is everything's really kind of like seedy and dark, and her real life is very tragic, and it feels pretty grounded and pretty disturbing from there on out. It doesn't feel like a weird B movie. It feels like a horror film all of a sudden. It feels like a psychological thriller, and it's really jarring for people because they're like, what is going on? She's playing, who's who? Like, she's playing a different character now? But no, that's the real character. And so that's my understanding of it in a nutshell. And I surprisingly didn't get that the first few times I watched it. Like, it didn't click with me. Okay. But once you kind of see it that way, I just think it's really brilliant. And I think it says a lot about kind of like idealizing things. And
do you think in any way it was Lynch's comment on the Hollywood system?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. I think it's a comment on, there are some really bizarre YouTube rabbit holes that you could go down with this stuff. I mean, yeah, I think it's a comment on what goes on in Hollywood, specifically with actresses. Mm-hmm. And, I think it is kind of, I don't know. I think it's his way of kind of shining a light on that without it being really heavy-handed, which I like. I like messaging where it's not beating you over the face with it. It's like sometimes a movie that having a very, very clear message, like a documentary or something, like, or, text coming up at the end, and it's just like, oh, like it can be really, that can really be really cool. And, you're like, oh, I get it. But I do like, some ambiguity, and I like kind of searching for meaning on your own, rather than it being heavy-handed. Usually, like, I enjoy that. So I don't know. I think part of it is nostalgia.
Sure.
Because of that sort of moment of being like, oh my God, But obviously it's not for everybody, but I think there's so much packed into it. There's kind of like a little almost like Pulp Fiction kind of side quest in it, of sort of like these, it's almost like a little short film. There's like short films in there almost, and he was initially going to make a full TV show out of this idea.
Out of Mulholland?
Yeah. So Mulholland Drive was going to be it was initially going to be a pilot, and then he kind of rewrote some sections, and rather than do kind of a Twin Peaks whole, kind of season or multiple seasons, he shortened it to just be a film. Sure. So there's a lot of ideas thrown in there, and there's all these kind of cool little short films, and that's another reason why, for a desert island thing, that's every single time I watch it, I'm like, oh yeah, this thing, like the guy at the Winkies diner, and like the creepy homeless guy behind it. Like, the buildup in that scene is like more terrifying than like most horror movies that I've seen, and there's something about, I don't know if you remember the scene, but this guy's telling his friend about a dream that he had. And
Yeah.
it's really like, it really disturbed him.
Yep.
And he talks about how he's like, you were standing right over there, and the way you looked at me, and then, and then I went outside, and then there, it's this guy's face, and he's terrified, and he's telling him about the dream. And then he kind of has that deja vu, like everything that he just told him about the dream starts happening. The guy goes over and looks over at him. And I've had so many moments like that in life where you have this deja vu or like, did I dream this already? Or am I dreaming right now? Like this sort of depersonalized thing where you kind of like check out for a moment and then you check back in and you're like, I don't know if I'm dreaming, and that's okay. Like probably not, but I never had seen a movie do that where they put that on screen in a way that like captured that feeling. And it's a really terrifying feeling to be like questioning reality for a moment.
Yeah.
And that used to happen to me a lot when I was a kid. Not like I full on would be like, oh, I guess it's a dream, let me try to fly or something.
Yeah.
It's like just you have those weird, it's a feeling. It's like a weird moment. It's not like total psychosis, but like that part of the movie really struck me. And it's really kind of I think his way of saying what you're seeing is not, it's mirroring reality, but it's not full reality. But it's also just a kind of a cool sequence. It's in the beginning of the movie, and it kind of sets the tone for like the darkness that's coming. But it's kind of random in this, because it's one of the first scenes, and you're like, who are these characters? What's happening? Who was that guy?
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of comes full circle at the end a little bit. But for people who haven't seen the movie, I mean, none of this is going to sound like anything.
Sure.
But yeah.
I feel like a lot of people have seen it though, so they'll be able to keep track with what you're saying. But stepping away from Lynch for a minute, I do want to talk about you and your career so far. So earlier when we were talking, you were saying that you're from Western Massachusetts, or you're from
Central Mass.
Central Mass.
Yeah. Grew up in Oxford, and
did you Oxford? That's fun coincidence. Going to a wedding. Somebody's from Oxford tomorrow. Did you always know you wanted to be a filmmaker? I know you're creative, and actually we talked about this yesterday. You would consider yourself a dabbler.
Yeah, I think I didn't, and I say, it sounds so like, I feel so weird saying like I'm a filmmaker. It's just like the shortened version of like, I don't know. I aspire to make movies. I'm not necessarily making movies right now, but I'm directing, brand content and that kind of thing. And that's not necessarily where I saw myself at 34, but I knew I wanted to do something creative when I was younger. And
did you kind of just fall into being a director, or is that something that you sought out?
So actually, I took a directing course at Main Media Workshops, and it was sort of like a surprise gift at the time. Where a lot of people pitched in for it.
Okay.
And were like, hey, you're going to take this course. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And my ex-girlfriend was the one to sort of get everyone together and pitch in for it. And
she knew you had an interest in kind of pursuing this.
Yeah. And she kind of explained at the time, like, I didn't know if you'd want to direct but you seem like a director to me as far as that world. And I think, I always just, loved movies, but didn't know really how they were made, or what does a director do? Or is the person holding the camera the director? And like sometimes, sure.
Sometimes.
And that, sort of learning kind of what a director does and learning how to interact with actors. And, I was only really making kind of documentary focused, like commercials and that kind of thing. So I hadn't worked with actors a ton. And so it gave you a lot of that course gave me a lot of kind of cool experience of realizing that, like, I am kind of a control freak. I like to oversee things. I like to tell people kind of what to do if we're all in the unified kind of vision. And I like when people are getting behind something. But I also am totally down to jump in and help someone else in their vision and help shoot something. And I also like editing. And so, me saying I'm a dabbler, I think is just because, like if you're going to learn any of this stuff, you have to kind of, I think,
have a picture.
Yeah, sure. Or at least have an interest in, the something from start to finish. That's at least been my experience. But no, I mean, I wanted to be a musician when I was a kid, and then, got into photography, and then, was really into visual art, and then, started working at a marketing company that then kind of tailored down to just video. And then, so I started learning video, and Figured I couldn't really make money doing music. So I was like, this is probably a good way to be creative and also make money. It's kind of the, the shortened version,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, get paid to practice your craft.
Yeah. And I thought that eventually that would lead to sort of making movies, and that would be like my own vision, and I could get paid to make movies. And then the more I look into people who are like directors that I really respect, I'm like, well, like, it's not a job. Like directing movies is not a job, really. It's like a gig. And every single director I respect, if they made it, it's just because a few of their movies did well. And I started realizing, well, that's not really. That's like holding out hope for that is kind of wild. That it could happen, but I also like I kind of need like a job.
Sure.
Like and like I kind of dabbled in the freelance thing for a while, and that's kind of what being a director is kind of like you're kind of like a freelance filmmaker. And like I didn't realize that when I was younger. Like the film industry is like it's a gig economy.
Yes, it is.
It's a lot of just like hired guns, and that's a particular lifestyle, and I think it's awesome, and that's kind of still a dream, right? Is to direct movies and do that whole thing, But yeah, I think I probably at some point like sold out or something, just like getting like a full-time job. I was like, it's probably like I started to tell you yesterday, like I was very bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for a long time. Like, eventually, working with brands and making commercials, I'll start making my own scripts. It's like, not necessarily. Like, that's not going to just start happening. Like, you have to really, really push that out there. But I think being in sales for video content and then directing and learning about producing and sort of me being a dabbler, I think has helped me. So to the point where if I do pursue that at some point and I pursue my own idea for making a feature film, because that's really what I'm interested in is feature films, then I think I have enough kind of experience from dabbling in different areas to like, make deals and direct actors and, my background in photography, I like definitely, have a visual eye. So I feel like it's definitely something that I'm sort of like, I guess, slowly preparing for if that ever happens, but I'm also open to the possibility of that never happening. But I still love dreaming. I still love movies, and that's I always will. Right?
Yeah, that passion's gonna stay with you,
right?
Regardless.
I think. I mean, how old are you?
32.
So yeah, at this point, I'm 34, and you start realizing that your hobbies or your interests in your 30s, at least for me, this is what happened to me. They're gonna be with you forever.
Yeah,
you're like, okay, these aren't just like things I'm like. I say I'm a dabbler. I just mean, I guess jack of all trades, master of none, sort of idea. But you realize that you're probably going to be interested in those things until you die. When I was younger, I thought like, well, maybe I don't know, like I don't know if I'll care about this forever,
Sure.
But like as it relates to movies and music, yeah, I'll probably always love it. But yeah, you got to cut me off. I'm just going to keep ranting.
No, this is all great. I mean, it's interesting to hear you say all this because sure, you might not have done or have yet to do, more long form narrative work, as you suggested. But I do find it interesting because, and maybe you'll agree with me here, but you do have a strong background in marketing and directing and producing, and there is an art form there
sure.
To marketing and advertising. And I think everything that you did at Votary is, I don't know, it seems to me that your skills are on display there. Would you agree?
I think I got to have a lot of awesome opportunities to sort of make projects my own.
Sure.
So, and I still do. So I'm at Animus Studios now, and they have a larger creative team, and it's kind of different style of content. But my background is more, like I said, in documentary.
And can you talk about that? What do you mean? So let me
documentary shorts, like brand documentaries. I like your tattoo, by the way.
Thank you very much. But can I get a little bit of the chronology here? So you do the main class. You go through that, right? At
Yeah,
what
so I
point
was still
is that?
working at Votary when I did that. And
Okay. And where is Votary, by the way?
They're in Worcester, Mass.
They are.
Yeah. So I worked there for like 8 years, and I also did freelance projects here and there, and I helped with other people's, short films and different things. But as far as things that I would consider something that I directed or produced or whatever, a lot of it was,
Documentary style.
yeah, documentary style, like brand stories. That became kind of the kind of focus or niche, right? And
like with the gentleman on your website, I think it's like the second video, he's talking about his filmmaking career, like that. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's my buddy Jamin.
Yeah. Yep.
He's amazing. He's like one of those people that I would consider a dabbler, but he's just like one of those people who is just like frustrating because he's just so good at everything, and he's so young.
Yeah.
And you're just like, dude, like, how are you just automatically that good at shooting and editing and directing and all of it?
Yeah.
Like, and like automatically. And he's like, he's like 10 years younger than me. Not that age really, it's an illusion, right? But it's like 100%. When you watch that, it's also cool too, because like I got to work with him when he was like, I think like 17, and I kind of like
watched him grow, watched him
under
develop.
my wing.
Yeah.
No, but that is one of those examples of a project that I was really pushing at the time, was doing these why stories.
Okay.
So my whole thing with the documentary stuff was,
and I'm sorry, did that come before Votary, or was that kind of in tandem?
That was at Votary. So that was kind of our own internal marketing content, and it was sort of my push to, hey, where it's sort of like the cobbler's kids have no shoes, right? Like, we're pushing all this storytelling and all these documentary short films for companies and for clients and brands, but we don't have that for ourselves. So why don't we do that for our team? So he was a full-time filmmaker with us. So that was one that I sort of tried to kick off with, I'm going to direct this, I'm going to produce this, I'm going to edit it myself. And, and I'm going to take all of his work and I'm going to try to shoot, some cool stuff and compile it all together into this, little documentary short. And we can keep doing these as a revolving thing.
Yeah.
So that was the idea there. And so for the brand stuff, my whole thing is like, it's really hard for me to get behind and have a lot of energy for something that I don't personally have either a lot of say in, or if I can't make it my own in some way. And I guess that's just how I am. I can still do a good job, but I was always at that time, like I said, kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I'm like, how can we make this like, this amazing, whatever. And like my whole thing was like, okay, well, I honestly don't really care about companies.
Sure.
And that's probably a bad thing, because
that's your line of work.
That's what I need to do. So what interests me, and what are people really interested in? Do people care about brands? Like, I guess they do.
Did you come up with an answer to that, or at least for yourself?
Yeah, I think I care about people and what their background and story is. And then I started being like, all right, well, that should be our thing.
Yeah.
That we should be really into stories.
Which you implemented really well, by the way, with the, forgive me, I don't know the company's name, but the eyeglasses. I watched that and I thought that was really...
Goswick Eye, yeah.
Goswick Eye, yeah. I thought that was really well done.
That was the pitch there. It was like, hey, are we going to make an ad, or are we going to tell your story? And like,
is there a way to marry the two?
Yeah, not everything's not everything is a story. And this was also in my days where I was like, I was trying to make anything like that would sort of move the needle for me personally. Like, my whole thing was like, if I would watch this and be entertained by it, then that's like what I want to try to make.
Yeah. North Star.
There's sometimes
kind of thing.
You got to just make an ad. Sometimes you got to just, not everything is going to be this like super compelling story. Like you start digging and you're like, well, really they just need to like sell this product. So then let's get creative in a different way. Right. But this was the time where I was sort of trying to really, hit the gas on like the storytelling stuff. And this was also like kind of trendy at the time, right? Like it's like very obvious now. It's like, oh, brand storytelling. But like at the time, it's like there wasn't a ton of that stuff. And when you started to see it, that felt kind of edgy and interesting. It's like, oh, like this like Nike is doing like this sponsored thing. And it's just like telling this cool story about somebody who like, is like a graffiti artist or something, and like
Yeah.
they just happen to wear Nikes, and you're like, and you're seeing this, and you're like, oh, that's cool. Like this is just like a random guy who's like probably homeless, and then I don't know if they ever.
I don't know if he actually wears Nikes.
Yeah, I don't know if he wears Nikes, but they threw some Nikes on him. Yeah, and he's like a real artist, and it's like this documentary short film, but it's like a brand thing, and like that started to pop up. You would see stuff like that. I'm not referencing any real thing right now.
Sure. No, but I get the point.
That stuff started popping up, so I was inspired by that and being like, all right, well, that's something that I think I'm good at, you know, interviewing people, so to speak, and then I'm interested in getting to know them and asking why and figuring out what's meaningful to them and all that stuff, and that's where that whole kind of mantra came from of like, you know, the why stories and all that stuff. So it was inspired by a bunch of different things, but that was sort of the where a large amount of kind of, I guess, if I have a portfolio, that's kind of where a lot of it came from. And it's very collaborative. It's not like it's like,
no, of course,
I, you know, did like my buddy Jono Wibberley, he edited that Goswick piece, and like he deserves like a majority of the credit for that. Like he's an incredible editor. And
well, it's not easy to edit documentary footage either, because
his first drafts would always be like just what I would consider like finished. Like he's just that type of editor where he's just that good. So, but like him and I shot it too, so it was very easy. It was two person crew, him and me.
Yep.
So it was very like scrappy, and I just had the idea of like, as I, you know, spoke to the guy who owns Goswick about just what he believes and like what he finds fascinating. He would go on these long kind of tangents, and that's kind of where that kind of beginning comes from with like the, you know, I started getting these visuals of like really macro shots of like, you know, and
how'd you do that, by the way? Those are very impressive. Was that,
thanks.
Did you actually film that? Like, yeah.
I mean,
how'd you get their eyes to dilate?
You just turn off the lights for a while and wait, and then, you know, you get it all set up, and then you just turn the light on, and you kind of watch their eyes dilate, and so I forget what lens we used, but we just got real close in there, you know, as close as we could with that lens. And if I had, you know, and this was, I probably could have rented lenses and done something even crazier, but it was just very scrappy.
Well, you guys made, I mean, it's a hell of a piece just with what you had.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, it was the best example I had of like, okay, I just want to do a bunch of these at the time. You know, I was just like, want to do a ton of these for companies, but like, you know, unfortunately, once you're doing like brand content, you start climbing to, well, obviously I want to work with bigger budgets, and I want to make more money, and I want to have more creativity. But you start working with these like global brands, and the money's there usually, but the creative freedom is not. No. And also the stories are harder to find because they just know they want people to be engaged in what they're doing, but they don't know how to get there. And then they see something like that, and they're like, we want that. And you're like, okay, how do we do that? Like, then you have to really, it becomes a really more of like a problem solving kind of pre-production issue, because it's not just like, oh, we just sit down with the CEO and interview, you know?
No, because generally with those bigger companies, I would imagine, I've had my experience with a couple of, you know, mid-level companies filming advertisements for them. But in those experiences, and I'm wondering if this is the case for you, it's like everybody's a creative and they've all got the solution, and getting everybody on the same page.
Yeah. Decision by committee and all that stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm still in some of that situation now, and I think if it really depends on the company, and it depends on how much freedom, you know, they kind of give you as the you know, the creative, but then also input their own ideas. You know, and sometimes it's just, I've realized that it's okay to not work with some people, you know, and some brands, and even if something seems like a really amazing opportunity at the time, it's not always a good fit, as they say. you know?
What was the structure of Votary? I mean, did you have a large team? Was it pretty much yourself kind of taking the lead on most of these projects? How did that go?
Dude, that's like a whole other podcast. Like there's like a lot there. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Fair
it's
enough.
like pretty scrappy for the most part.
Scrappy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I'd love to talk to you about the video series you guys did with Jordan Peterson and his son. That was pretty cool. Very well shot. Like, did they come to you with that idea? Had they seen your work in the past, or was that the kind of thing that you had to put in a bid for? What was that whole process
that was
like?
the owner of Votary reaching out like cold
Oh, really?
and being like, "Hey, we like your stuff.
We can do this for you.
Can we work with you?"
Yeah.
And his son is making or has made a writing app
Essay, right?
essay.
Yep.
And they were in the early stages of needing to market that. And
So you guys just kind of linked up with them at the early stages?
Yeah,
and
I
this
didn't
timed out
have.
nicely?
I honestly didn't have very much involvement with that. I helped, with some kind of co-directing, but really not much. And like, it was cool to meet them and everything, but it was kind of a surreal thing. We're just like, okay, but yeah, I mean, from their perspective, it's like we're literally willing to donate this project to you.
Oh, you guys donated it? Yeah.
We just did it as a passion project.
How long?
So
how
that-
long was the experience from like pre-production to finalized product?
I don't know, maybe like a month or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think on and off, but it was only a few shoot days.
But you
yeah,
guys-
did you jump into the website and see that stuff?
Yeah. Well, I started on your website because I wanted to.
I was gonna say that's not on my website, right?
It's not on
Okay.
yours. It's not
was
on yours.
like-
But I figured because the train of thought was I wanted to see everything that you had been working on.
Yeah,
and then I
yeah.
realized that a lot of it was linking up with what Votary had done. So I wanted to kind of get a sense of
Sure.
what that whole process was like. And then I was going through some of their videos, stumbled across that. And I figured because you were with Votary and I saw a couple of photos of you in like the behind the scenes, I was wondering how much input or, what your level of collaboration was with it.
Yeah, not a ton, honestly. I had a couple cool moments with Jordan Peterson, and he was like really encouraging with like we talked about music, and that was cool. But I didn't really have like a ton of involvement in the actual production. Ironically, like
Sure.
it was sort of like it was. I mean, it was kind of all hands on deck, but I was sort of just like extra set of hands, extra like sort of. That's how a lot of things ran there. It's like
Just as a general note, like at that company.
well, we would not that there weren't set roles, but there's definitely a lot of like wearing many hats kind of thing, and it was very, very collaborative. And yeah, there was like at that time, I think we probably had the most full-time crew that we ever had. And so there was just a shorthand with
Sure.
everyone. And I still work with a lot of those guys. Most of them are either freelancers or somewhere else now, but like, there's definitely still that shorthand,
Mhm.
but yeah.
So how did you get started there? I mean, was it like an internship opportunity? Like, was this fresh out of like school, or how did that whole thing come about?
No, I mean, I was working at like a sandwich shop and was freelancing, just doing like freelance design and photography and like random things. And, I just kind of, became aware of them and I, got connected and just started kind of showing up at their office and just being like, hey, I'm going to like work from here if that's cool. And like, if you have any work for me,
Let me know.
let me know.
Yeah.
And then they were like, well, really what we need is sales. And if you want to like try to learn that side of things, we'll give you commission.
Okay.
And
You did.
fast forward however many years, like I just tried to learn how to get my foot in the door with that stuff. And like, again, I didn't even think of myself as wanting to be like a director or even like, a videographer at that point. 'Cause they were doing full service, like marketing stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm not really like here to
No, we don't need to talk about
because it's like such a long story.
We can talk about it as much or as little as you want. I just think it's interesting because it seems that a lot of the work that you've done was kind of centered there.
A majority of my time has definitely been there. Yeah, I was working there. Yeah,
and I mean, again, this kind of goes back to what kind of kicked off the whole this part of the conversation. But you are doing the things. You might, sure, it's sales, but in that way, you're kind of learning the skill of selling somebody on an idea if you ever were to go and do it later.
I did not have an interest in sales initially, and like I thought sales was really dirty. But then the more I learned about it, I realized if you're selling something that you actually believe in and you're interested in, people are just emotional beings and they will buy into your vibe more so than doing some sort of psychological trick.
Yeah.
I learned those too, though. I took like an MIT course on like executive negotiation.
How'd that go?
And I did really, really well in it.
Yeah.
And it was kind of weird. And what I learned in that was not to overthink the technical and to go in it with confidence. And there would be like, heads of companies that would play out these like fake sales scenarios, and they were like stumbling over their words and stuff. And I'm like, bro, this is not a real thing. This is like a fake sales opportunity. And I would like always get them to like give me more, fake money and like the negotiation and everything. So like I ended up doing really well in like in the overall kind of course or whatever.
Sure.
And what that taught me is like that you can sort of just put that out there as like that passion or that confidence, and people feed off that. And like if you're doing that for something that you actually care about, it can be helpful. The problem is if you don't really care about certain companies or brands or something, then it becomes difficult. And so you can chase certain opportunities and think like, well, what's going to give me the opportunity to do something creative and do something that's my vision or something. But really, for me, once I started realizing, well, I really want to make feature films, and I actually am okay kind of trying to be creative in like a problem solving way for these sort of commercial content. And I don't really want to be a part of the sales aspect anymore. It was sort of easy to make that shift. And and that's kind of what I started pouring a lot more like of my own energy into like music and that kind of thing. And then being able to sort of like get my creative juices flowing for, like brand video projects and sort of quietly writing things on my own.
You told me yesterday you don't write.
Huh?
You told me yesterday you don't write. I'm busted. We had a conversation yesterday, and I was asking you about the writing process.
I said I write as it just flows out of me.
Yeah.
And then I lose. I'm not a very disciplined writer. Not that I don't write. I do write, but I would never call it writer's block because I'm not sitting down long enough to be blocked. Because I'm not disciplined enough with it.
So when you sit
I'll
down,
sit
you
down
have a purpose.
and it's coming right out. It's flowing.
Yeah.
And I got a whole idea. Like my first script I ever wrote, I wrote in one sitting. And it's like
full script feature?
I don't know how long it is. I think it's like 45 pages or something. Like it's like
still that's
not so it's like not quite fleshed out. And I was like 18.
Okay.
And I just like hammered it out. And then I realized that I have to be in that kind of like flow to really write, and I don't really go back and like edit too many things.
Sure.
And then I started realizing that trying to write in a linear fashion from start to finish is like not really the way to go. Like you kind of have to have an idea of the structure and the story and the outline and themes, and then kind of spread out the details rather than going fully detailed for the first I'm gonna write every frame of the first 25 minutes, and then keep that momentum going for the entirety of the film. It's like
burn yourself out.
Well, it's like there's something kind of romantic about that, because then you're almost watching it in real time in your head, but you don't really know where it's going. And
so when you've done that in the past, do you sit down with the final where it's gonna land?
What do you mean? Like I'll get to the end and then and see where it goes? Because that's usually where I check out. I have a lot of half-finished things.
Oh, well, I guess.
Then I learned to start outlining.
Yeah.
Start outlining a full thing, and I still struggle with like endings of everything.
Okay, and that's what I was getting at. I think I forget who said this, but they said something to the degree of like, really just don't sit down and start writing unless you know where it's going to end. Because once you know where it's going to end, generally everything else will kind of, domino down to that last point.
Yeah, I think I have a lot of ideas for beginnings, and then I kind of like not knowing where it's going to end, because then I kind of discover it, and so I have finished some things for scripts, but I don't know. I definitely don't think I have like a perfect philosophy with that, because I think I know that some of the ideas I have are too ambitious to actually try to get made.
And does that prevent you from even taking the step into the pool?
It prevents me from trying to like really like push to finish it. Like the last thing that I was working on, part of the reason I got excited about it is I knew it was kind of doable.
Okay.
And it was an idea I've had for a long time, and I just got really excited, and I kind of poured myself into that world. But then once I reached a certain point of like, okay, right now's not really the time that I'm going to put a lot of creative energy into trying to make a film. Then I was like, I'm going to just put this totally on the back burner. I'm not going to keep dabbling in something and stretching myself in all these different directions. I mean, the long and the short of it was that I was looking for a new job, and I was trying to get two albums made. And so I was like, I need to put my creative energy into something that like I know I can actually finish, because so much of what we're talking about is, this sort of journey of unfinished projects, and just trying to be like, where can I be creative and like exist and thrive and do something that is like fulfilling, and like just trying to find my path or where it is. And, I started realizing that like, I can separate how I make money, and also how I like what is like the most creatively fulfilling thing for me, and those things I thought had to be married for a long time, and not that I don't get any creative fulfillment from doing what I do, but it's just a different thing. It's like when you have like a pure creative idea, that's brings me back to David Lynch.
Of course.
It all comes full circle.
Yeah, here we go.
David Lynch is somebody I look at who has managed to do that, I think, is to really put his own pure creative idea out there as what he would call like a moving painting. Like he was into painting when he was younger, and then he had the epiphany that seems fairly obvious, but like films can just be a moving painting.
Yeah.
I can, and so it really is a piece of art at that point. And I think the purist in me, the romantic in me, really likes that idea. But that doesn't mean that you can't put your own creative spin on things and still enjoy it. It's just, I think it was just a switch that I made internally of being like, oh yeah, I don't have to give all my creative energy to something that's not my vision, and not like, and I
do, because if you do that, you find yourself kind of burnt out, and
I wasn't investing in the things that that were kind of my own things. And it's like, it's hard to say that stuff without sounding really self-centered or something, but it's just like, it really is like you only have so much energy to put out and to invest in things.
Yeah.
And you can just wear it thin, and then I, for me, like the result is like, you can just get so used to being disappointed or something that you you burn out or you want to give up.
Yeah.
But then you start realizing that there is no giving up if you really are truly, if your heart's in it as a creative person. It's like you might as well just like end it.
Yeah.
If you're, it's like, it sounds really hopeless and like dark, but like, do you know what I don't know if
I
you
understand where you're coming from though.
Yeah.
Because I'm kind of, another reason that I wanted to do this podcast with these guys was hopefully to kind of find my own inspiration.
Yeah.
Because there was a stretch, we did 6 short films in like a 2.5 year period. And, it was the kind of thing where by the end of it, I was left a little bit disappointed in the end result. By all metrics, they were successes. They look great, they sound great. You could argue there was good acting, good writing, but at the end of it, it didn't turn out the way that I had envisioned it.
So what are these projects you're talking about?
So the whole COVID thing, right? We had been shut down for a year. By the end of 2020, myself, my producing partner Jimmy, Luke, and Alex Ace. We just kind of collectively were banging our heads being like, we've done fucking nothing this year. So I quickly wrote a short and I'm like, this is what we're doing. Just like there were, I think 9 of us, 11 of us. So we're like, let's go. It's outside. Like we can do this. Yeah. So it was set during World War II. We got a bunch of World War II like costumes. It was literally 2 characters and a gun. So we filmed that. And like off the heels of that, we were feeling the momentum. We all loved working together. So Jimmy wrote another script and we filmed that. And then while we were editing that, we wrote a 3rd script that involved a nuclear fallout shelter being built. It was in the 1960s. We filmed that. We edited that, and then it was like right off the heels of that, we went into a short film by a friend of mine, Steve Schloss. He had this epic, bloodbath of a short with all of these crazy camera movements, and I was kind of vibing off of his vibe. So I'm like, fuck it, let's crash a car. So I wrote a short that, we filmed and we crashed a car in the middle of winter. And then.
So where does the lack of inspiration come in? Because you guys are machines.
Well, that's what I was getting at. You talk about, them out, you talk about putting awesome. All of your effort into a thing and, wearing yourself thin. We put a lot of heart and effort into it. But by the end of it, I was burnt. And it's been like a year and a half, maybe a little over a year and a half where like, Jimmy and Ace are coming to me and being like, what's next? And I'll say that to them. Dude, and we just I'm burnt, man. I'm trying to find that inspiration again by talking to people like yourself and talking to these other filmmakers,
I don't know if that's going to help.
No, but you talking about kind of the purity of like finding that and, it doesn't go away. I can relate to that. It's like, even though I don't have the inspiration to write for all this time, even though I can't even put myself in that headspace of imagining being on set again, I've still got the ideas. I've still got the things, the emotions, these themes that I want to explore. Yeah. And every time I sit down and, pretentiously think, I'm going to write a novel, it only takes me. I don't need all the production bullshit. Every time I sit down to do that, I keep thinking of images and ways that you can cut something together so that it creates something more meaningful and it becomes a communal experience as opposed to just sitting down with a book. So
do you like watching films more than reading books?
I wouldn't say that. I've gotten back into reading. I do what you do though. I'm a habitual, I'll start the book, I'll get halfway through it and then I'll put it down. Yeah. But I do enjoy the solitary process of reading and kind of making the images in my head. Yeah. It's difficult though, because it's difficult for me watching movies these days because I've found, I don't know how you feel about this, but I've found a lot of the same thing. I come across these movies that like really stand out, like Love Lies Bleeding, the Kristen Stewart movie that just came out.
I haven't seen it.
Ooh, I highly recommend it. That came out of nowhere for me. And I'm like, this gets my engines revving. Now we're talking. Like this is a new place that they're taking a movie that I can get on board with. And it gets me excited again.
Nice.
But I find a lot of other things, they don't hit.
Well, dude, I mean, at least you were getting burnt out investing in the things that were your own ideas fully. It's like that's beautiful. That's awesome. That's really awesome.
It was a good stretch of time, and I'm very grateful for the people.
Well, I can't wait to watch all this stuff.
Yeah, I'll have to send you some links. I mean, I think it's all on YouTube at this point, but I was very grateful for the people that, you know, kind of got behind me, definitely Jimmy and Ace included, being like, okay, this is a fucking crazy idea and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of long nights and phone calls and emails, but let's do it.
Yeah. I think I was telling you yesterday on the phone, like, that there's something about short films that I think I've needed to kind of get over not wanting to make them because I don't watch them, and they always seemed like I just wanted to jump right into making like a feature because I like long dialogue scenes, and I like doing things that are you know, there's character development and there's sort of this kind of, I don't know, stretch of time, and I love feature films, but ultimately, like, I think I've always tried to bite off more than I could chew, and like I that's why I've been starting these ideas, and then they don't get made because I'm like, well, I'm not yet. I don't know how to get this thing off the ground, and I'm investing in all these other things, and now I realize like I probably should just take one of these script ideas and just shoot a scene of it, you know, and like simplify my life a little bit and have that be something that I could use to sell the full script or something like that. But yeah, it's a crazy world because it's, yeah, like you mentioned writing a novel, it's like that is a much cheaper, easier art form, and that's part of why I love music, is because there's just that pure like creative expression that you don't need 1,000 other people to be involved in. You don't need a ton of money, and like, you know, and you're not expecting to make a ton of money back usually. I mean, obviously there are people who do in the music industry, but for me, I'm not necessarily, you know, expecting that. But it's tough because in my opinion, movies are like the best way to consume art and consume a story, because it kind of has everything. I agree. It's got the music, it's got the sound design, it's got, you know, it's got the actors who are giving the emotions. Yeah, it has the, you know, the storytelling aspect of it and writing, and then it has the, you know, the visual art aspect of it, and it's really is photography too, and so there's something cool about that, but it's also like, man, it's so fucking expensive to like, and that was another thing. That was another thing, you know, after we got to the end of the journey with these, you know, short films, we had invested a lot of fucking money into it. Sure. And there's no return on a short film. Yeah. There's no return on a short film. I mean, and it's funny to hear you say it, like, because festivals or anything. We did. We got into some festivals. Yeah. The first two had a get the Leafs, you know. Got the Leafs. They're on the posters, you know. Gotta have those Leafs. So we kind of got a little bit of our investment back. But what was I going to say? It's like, by the end of it, we were financially burnt, and that's another thing. It's like, you know, it's hard to. We were enjoying the process of funding these ourselves because at the time the film industry was booming. You know, we were coming off the whole COVID thing and things were just in production. So we had plenty of, you know, we were working. Yeah. But yeah, now it's like, and it's been interesting speaking with specifically Chris Carter, who was just here. And then before him, we had a good buddy of ours, Shawn. And what's so fascinating about them is that they're playing with the format in a very interesting way. They've kind of set themselves rules, like, we are not investing any money into this, sans like maybe, you know, buying the crew lunch, if there is a crew. Yeah. And they've taken a very, we can do it ourselves mentality. And it's a slower process for both of them, but the work that they're coming out with is very unique and it's of good quality. And they're also playing with how they distribute it in a unique way. So Chris, he has kids, he has a full-time job. So his short was dictated by, I've got to film this at night when my kids are asleep. Yeah. So, you know, as he's filming it, like, he's posting on Instagram. So like, you get the behind the scenes stuff, but you also get the chapters, scenes being released, like, you know, every few weeks. So it's like, you go back to the story, you know, it takes a few weeks for the next scene to come out, but you go back to the top of the story and you get to watch this whole thing play out and kind of see where it's going. And then with the Optic, he's kind of essentially, I'm going to bastardize the way that he described this, but in essence, he's creating a feature film, which he is
putting out in chapters. And he's got like 5 different main characters who all center around this one missing person. And you're slowly figuring out how they're all interconnected. And it's kind of this, thematically, he's interested in the interaction between technology and the human. So all of that's kind of at play. It's called The Signal, and he's releasing it on YouTube. So it's been...
He's releasing the full thing, or is he releasing the first kind of section or chapter or episode?
I think, if I remember correctly, he's released 2 chapters so far, but I think they've filmed 3 or 4 of them.
Nice.
And I think his goal, if I remember correctly, is he's trying to get 1 chapter done every month.
Yeah.
So I think they've got maybe a few more in the chamber. But yeah, this is just a process that he's kind of been engaging with, and
it's cool.
Yeah, talking to these people, it's interesting to see what everybody's up to.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's like, it's kind of a funny timing for me. Like I was telling you yesterday, because I'm like, I've sort of put a lot of like the filmmaking stuff on the back burner, but it's just something that I want to do so badly. It's just like the purist in me is like, when I put my energy towards something, I'm just like, yeah, I really want to make one of these script ideas or something. Like if it's sort of my thing or whatever, I'm going to put my stamp on it. But yeah, like, I've been finding a lot of satisfaction in like all kinds of different things, and like, definitely in music lately. But
yeah, let's talk about the album. I told you yesterday when we got on the phone that I kind of, I had put on your solo album about a half hour before we were supposed to be on the phone, and I found myself just writing, and then before I knew it, I was like a little bit over the 4 o'clock, and I'm like, shit, I gotta. So that's my way of complimenting it. It's a very good album, and I really dig. So it's an interesting story. Can you tell me and the audience how that came about? Well,
so well, first off, like, yeah, I've been sort of dabbling in just like writing piano stuff since I was a kid, and I had this little project back in the day called Canine Car Crash, and it was based on watching my dog get hit by a car when I was a kid. And then it became like my email address when I was younger, and it just was like this thing that followed me around that I thought was catchy. But through the years, I've sort of dabbled in different, just writing piano here and there. But I was like, oh, what am I gonna do with this? Like, am I gonna go on tour with this? I don't know. But I've been in a band called Jackal Twins for a few years, and we've been looking to record our album, and we booked some studio time at Machines with Magnets, and we had 4 days booked, and then our drummer got sick, and then 2 days I let them know, and 2 days booked up, and then 2 days were still open, and I was like, can you just keep those 2 days for me?
Sure.
And he's like, okay, for what? I'm like, I don't know. I need to make something. I need to record something. I have so much music that's just on hard drives or whatever. And this has been my creative outlet, and something at the time was definitely like more so a need for myself to complete something. I was like, oh, I'll go in there. I'll bring a drum set. I'll do this full, like all these songs that I have kind of kicking around. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, you have 2 days. That's not realistic. And then the more I thought about it, I'm like, what were we gonna do with those 4 days? Like, we ended up recording our album, and it took us more than 2 weeks to record just the music, never mind the vocals. I don't know what we were thinking booking 4 days. So anyways, because since the band has finished the album. But at the time I was like, I just am gonna throw myself into the situation and just make myself create something and get it down and record. It was kind of stressful because it was only 2 weeks out. But once I decided, all right, this is going to be piano, and I'll kind of like dig this old project out of
find all the hard drives, put together,
whatever. I was like, I had a mixture of things that I wrote during the pandemic on MIDI with like my headphones, and I just like, there was one night where I was just like really stoned, and it was like 2 a.m. and I wrote like 4 songs in a row. So I went back and I learned those, because I had forgotten them. And I learned those, and I kind of tried to make them actual things, like refine them. And then there was just other things I had kicking around, and then some of it was like, improvised. So it's definitely like you can hear it in the recording. Like, I'm rushing. There's no click track. There's mess ups, but it is very like, okay, you had 2 days and you went for it. And it was just a fun thing to like pour myself into for a little bit. And then, I got I had this idea for a album cover, and when I was playing a burning piano in the woods, and I was like, once I decided that, I was like, I have to do that.
Yeah,
So
I mean, the album cover is badass.
Thanks, man. Yeah, so that was.
Did
that
you
was,
actually? Like,
yeah, that's real.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's awesome.
It's very. It was done as safely as it could have been.
Do I want to know more?
That's all I'll say about that.
There we go. Okay.
But it was just fun to just have energy for something that was like my own idea, and that's kind of what it represents for me. Like it was just kind of like a really, no pun intended, lighting a fire under my ass to just create something and finish it, and I just needed to do that.
Well, it's interesting to hear you say that because something that's come up a few times throughout the conversation so far is, the idea of the purest idea kind of getting itself out there. And it seems like the way this kind of came about, you talk about not having the click or anything, or it maybe being out of time or whatever, but it feels very real. It feels very raw. Like me experiencing that album yesterday, I got none of that. I kind of just got something that felt like, wow, where did this come from? Why did this come from? How did this? So I don't know. Do you get that feeling when you look back on it now, or are you kind of your own worst critic and you see what you could have done?
Well, there's always that. I mean, I think I have I don't know, it's sort of two sides to me as far as like creating something. Like I really like that. What I like about the sort of improv kind of style of creating, or, if you're doing like a painting and you're not thinking too much about it, or you're improvising and your instrument is, you're kind of, it's like a catharsis in the moment, and then you're capturing something, and it's like a feeling. And, I love John Coltrane and listening to things that he never played the same thing twice.
Sure.
Right. Like not the same exact way. And I love that. But then there's also the other side of me that's just like, well, yeah, but then sometimes you just sound really sloppy. You listen to it and you're later on and you're like, well, yeah, in the moment you were feeling it. Yeah. But now it sounds like shit. And so the critical, more like perfectionist side of me will get in the way of me finishing things. So I think, that album was not improvise entirely or anything. There's moments of that for sure, and there's things that I recorded that I never had played it that way, and I feel like you have the luxury of that if you're just like hitting record and just playing piano when it's just you.
Sure.
That record is just a bass drum and piano. Like there's just a couple moments of percussion. The rest of it's just piano. Usually it's just one take, and so. And I only had 2 days, so I was like, I was just like trying to blast through it, and I was being very easy on myself, and that's unlike me. But I knew that if I was too hard on myself, that I wouldn't finish it, and I wouldn't do it, and I wouldn't get it done. And it was kind of like a little bit of just, you need to finish something, And so I don't know. I don't really listen to it now, so I don't really know it's there. I just know that at the time I was like, there's definitely mistakes there. There's definitely things I overlooked. But I'm actually pretty happy with it for what it is.
Yeah. Was there like a weight off your shoulder when you kind of finished those 2 days in the recording? Or did you feel the pressure of, well, now I got to package it and, get the photo for the cover album?
It was both.
And you actually pressed it on vinyl, right? You did a few.
That was another thing where I'm like, who am I kidding? No one's going to buy my actual record. But it was just something I've always wanted to do. Like all the bands that I was in before, and in my like teens and 20s, like we just did DIY stuff and like sold CDs. We never like actually got it fully distributed. And I came across a small pressing plant like Burlington something, and they did like, you could press like 100 records, and you could actually get it within like a month, and that's unheard of. Usually it takes like they're back ordered, and usually it's just like a long process, right? And it's really expensive, but I got like kind of a nice little deal, so I was like, why not? I'll probably just have these 100 records under my bed. But it was, again, I was sort of just like doing it for myself, because it was just something I wanted. I love vinyl, and I knew like my friends would buy it.
Sure.
So like that was really all it was. It wasn't, and I'm not trying to be like Nils Fram or something and go on tour and just stand on stage with just me and a piano or something. I've always liked being in bands or whatever, but it was just kind of a fun thing to just like pour myself into at a time where I was feeling very kind of like unsure what to do, what was the next step. And, you know, I was in like a new relationship, and I was kind of like, I feeling the season at Votary end, and it was like looking for a new job and just feeling kind of like creatively bankrupt.
Sure.
And so I just needed to pour my energy into something. And, you know, that's kind of the output of it.
I love that.
Yeah,
I do. And then you've got another album coming out, yeah?
Yeah, the band Jackal Twins is gonna, you know, hopefully have that out like later on, and that's a very different vibe. I play guitar in that, and it's like really kind of loud, spazzy, experimental music, and it's stuff that, you know, we wrote. You know, the pandemic was like a big blockade of us recording, but we've had a lot of it done since then, and it's just, you know, been kind of just the long-awaited
Release.
Process of just recording and then trying to book time and then, you know, getting it mastered and going through a lot of painstaking processes with that. So it's like a 3-piece, and that is I think the best thing I've ever worked on creatively.
Yeah. Why do you say that?
I just think that like I worked harder on that than I ever have on anything.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's like we'll see how it turns out or what the reception is. But for that, like you know, for what it is, I'm pretty proud of that. And it's closer to what you know, the type of music that I actually have wanted to put out. You know, the piano stuff is like, I don't really sit down and listen to instrumental piano.
I do now.
You know, it's just something that's fun for me to do. And, you know, I've always had a piano in my house. And,
when did you learn to play? Like when you were little?
Yeah, I took lessons as a kid, and you know, but I taught myself guitar later. You know, I always thought guitar was way cooler, and I always liked, you know, piano was something that I felt like, oh, I have to practice and, you know, do all that. And guitar was always something where it's like, I just loved electric guitar. I just wanted to like make weird noises, and like I got a multi-effects pedal as a kid, and it just like was the most fun I ever had.
Sure.
So it's really just like, yeah, the piano thing is kind of just me being like, all right, I want to finish something. And then the band is more like, all right, I've been basically in bands that were like really loud and kind of like passionate and kind of genre all over the place, genre wise. Like I've been doing that since I was like a kid. Mm-hmm. And so it's just kind of a love letter to my former self. Like, here's an album that you wish you had when you were like 18.
Oh, cool.
That's kind of like what the idea is. And yeah, it's been kind of terrible, the process of getting it mixed and mastered and of that. Well, it's just that's a whole other it's a whole other tangent. But it's just like, it's just so it just takes so much time, and you know, you have so much expectations, and there's multiple people involved. If it's a band, it's not just you making the decisions, and you know, you work with people who have strong opinions, and we went to people who were like our ideal kind of dream studios and dream like people we look up to. They have their own vision for something that it's hard for you to let go of what you want too. Yeah. And it's just a whole lot of complicated details, and we ended up recording the vocals ourselves. And so anyway, I know this isn't a music podcast. No, it's just kind of where my head's been at lately, and you know, and where, as far as like creative effort, like where it's been going. But yeah, I mean, we can get back to talking about movies. I'm not here to promote my music stuff at all.
I am here to interview you about your creative ventures. So that's what we're doing here.
All right.
So if the conversation goes there, I'm happy to go with you. I suppose.
Thanks for listening to it.
No, of course.
You know, I didn't even how did you find it?
Dude, you can find anything on the internet.
I guess my Instagram's linked to my website. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Just a little bit of modern day sleuthing.
Yeah.
That's all it comes down to.
Just totally creeping.
Yeah, so creeping. Let me close out that section then with when does the album come out?
There's not a date. There's not a set date, but it's later this year. So the first single should be out this fall.
And are you guys going to do any, shows promoting? local or taking it on the road?
That's yet to be seen, man. This has been like one of those things where it's just like, let's just get this thing
Get the
done.
album
Yeah,
done.
like there's a lot of. I mean, I have a lot of ideas and a lot of things that I want to do, but it's just a matter of, there's multiple people involved, and we're in a very different stage in our life than when we started this project.
Sure.
And so it's like, it might just be like the catharsis again, like a catharsis of finishing something.
Sure.
And it just being like, okay, this was like a creative baby we needed to birth. We don't know what's going to happen now with
now
the
let's
rest
see
of our
how
lives.
and when it walks, if it wakes up in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
yeah.
We're all very similar in the sense that we are very prolific, but we're very terrible at finishing things.
Yeah.
And so it's exciting to actually try to finish something, but then that also means that like nobody in our band, we don't have a manager. It's like nobody is the type A planner.
Mhm.
We're all the free flowing creative people. And so it's really tough. So
Yeah.
I sometimes take the role of, hey guys, let's do, and then sometimes the drummer takes that. It's like it's just, it's kind of all over the place with, but ultimately it's been more just like tunnel vision on just, can we just
Finishing.
finally
Yeah.
complete it, right? And I mean, it might not even be complete. Like I'm talking about it like it's done, but like there's a good chance that we can
Find 80 other things to tinker with, and
absolutely.
yeah.
I haven't let go of that possibility.
Fair enough.
I was telling you yesterday, I'm reading the book on Kubrick, and like that's really been inspiring to see how hard he has worked on projects that never came to fruition, and the projects that did come to fruition, the level of detail and passes and revisions and the lengths that he would go to finish something. It's been really helpful, and like psychologically and emotionally right now, it's so draining to like be at the finish line of something. Reading Rick Rubin's book was really helpful too.
The Creative Act. That was awesome.
I did finish that book.
Yeah, you have to. Did you listen to it on audiobook?
I did, and that made it easier.
Yeah.
Because it's just like small tidbits of information and ideas, and some of it I was like, well, yeah. And then some of it I was like, oh,
yeah.
That's why I do that.
Yep. And to hear it narrated by him, it hits even better.
Emotionally, reading Kubrick and Odyssey and then listening to The Creative Act has been pretty helpful
What got you started on the Kubrick book?
I'm on a Kubrick Reddit thing, and someone recommended it to me, and I just ordered it and started reading it, and I can't put it down, man. I love it so much.
Do you find that what you're picking up in that book has any bearing on what you're doing on the filmmaking side of things? Like, is it making you thinking about your writing differently? Is it making you think about the potential to put something into production anytime in the near future?
It's inspiring me on multiple levels. I think it's inspiring me just as somebody who wants to make things and have it be, a particular way and have something to say, because that's something we haven't really covered, is like, as a creative person, you can just let something flow out of you and question it later and figure out what the meaning was, or you can have something in mind that you want to say ahead of time and you find something that fits that. And Kubrick had a lot to say, and he only got a few opportunities to say something specific that he believes in. But what he did is he found stories that already exist that he could put his own spin on, which is really weird. And I don't know, he was constantly in search of stories. He was like a journalist. But then once he'd latch on a story, he would obsess over it. Like Eyes Wide Shut, I almost grabbed that because I wanted to more so talk about it than pick it as whatever
Desert Island.
Desert Island.
Wasn't Eyes Wide Shut based on a novella, dream novella?
Yeah, Tromneville. So
Tromneville.
He wanted to make that movie since the 50s.
Yeah, and didn't he buy all the copies that had been put out by that point?
He bought the rights really early in his career, and he in between every single movie he ever produced, he was chipping away at that.
Yeah.
He was obsessed with that story. And his wife, when they first got married, like begged him to not make it on their first like year of marriage, because she knew how much he would pour himself into it.
Yep.
And she knew the story. and she didn't really like it. She didn't really like the story, and she was like, please don't do this.
Might not be healthy for our relationship.
Exactly. She's like, think about, the wisdom you'll have years down the line, but like, we're early into marriage. Like, do you really want to like make this story about like a marriage falling apart and jealousy and like all this sort of weird sexual repression and like all the other stuff that it's about, and like and just
he's like, you're
jealousy,
probably right.
really jealousy. But I don't know, it's a weird story to be so obsessed with, but he really was. So anyway, there's the things that have, I guess, inspired me with it is thinking of that as being a possibility of finding stories that are already there, and then kind of putting my own spin on it and having that be a possibility.
Is that something? Well,
I've never done that. I've never even, not that I've never even made a movie, but like I've never considered that as a possibility. And it's definitely helped just like see, I think, the level of kind of commitment you have to have for your kind of initial vision to sort of try to see it through.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that there's not like bobs and weaves and problem solving and compromise along the way, but I think you can lose sight of that, and you also can lose energy. And it's an emotional thing, because sometimes it's like in the creative act, he talks about like when something's almost done, you'll find suddenly you'll want to burn everything to the ground.
Yes.
And
yes,
I relate to that. And I've burned so many things to the ground.
Yeah.
Including a piano in the woods.
Yeah.
No,
fun.
but like just having that sort of mentality and realizing that that's not unique to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not just that suddenly you lose interest, and also you can't be driven by your emotions that much, and also you have to recognize your inability to be objective with your own thing that you're making, and you have to sort of let it be what it is and not try to let it totally control it, while simultaneously not losing sight of your initial kind of feeling or the initial point that you're getting at and the initial kind of thing that sparked it. And trying to keep that alive is so difficult, especially if you're kind of somebody who gets a lot of energy up front for something.
Yep.
And you get all excited, and it's all about the emotion, and it's all about that feeling, but then that's not going to stay forever. It's like starting a relationship. It's like you're not going to feel the same way 2 years in as you did when you started, but that doesn't mean that 2 years in it's going to be worse.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it just changes, and you invest in a different way, and then you're like, oh, this is actually better than what I initially felt. That was so overwhelming. It's like, but your relationship to the thing you're making shifts, and I don't know. I admire. People have a lot of things to say about Kubrick, and he definitely was a total asshole to a lot of people, but he was clearly a genius, and he had commitment to like projects, and he also had commitment in his personal life. I mean, he was married 3 times, but for the most part, he committed to his third wife, and they had kids together, and he was married to her for decades, and that's inspiring to me too. Like the fact that he was able to sort of have a family life. It's also what I liked about, learning about David Lynch's life, is just like him always trying to
he was
have
the
that
opposite,
balance.
to my understanding.
Well,
Lynch was the exact opposite.
Lynch is a purist in the sense that
it's all about the work.
He did have family, and he did get married several times.
But he would be the first to admit, like, I wasn't a great father. I made the work the first and foremost.
He was a different animal, just in the sense that he was like, I think, just like not like completely alone. But I mean, at this point, I think he might be. But
yeah, he's a bit of a recluse. But it was nice what Kubrick did, and I agree.
Kubrick
with you,
he basically stayed married to that one woman and lived in like a couple houses, like basically the same house. And
he set up all of his work right there, which is
just stayed close to home. And like, I don't know, there's something to that I think is inspiring. And yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, like Lynch is a different animal.
But I agree with you about Kubrick, though, because something in the film industry that you don't get, and Kubrick was able to crack that code, is a work-life balance. I mean, when you're in production, you're generally on set for 12 to 16 hours, depending on what position you're in.
Yeah.
And then, sometimes your Saturdays are shot, and it's like, how do you balance that with a wife and kids? So the fact that he was able to kind of take his whole operation and say, no, like, these are just as important to me as my films. Like, we're going to figure out a way to make this work.
Yeah.
It was pretty inspiring.
It is. And like, even in like the thick of 2001: A Space Odyssey, or like one of the more demanding productions, like he kept everything so close to home.
Yep.
That he would just go home and still
have a meal,
and still like talk to his kids before bed, but barely be sleeping, and get up and do it all over again. And like, I don't know, just that work ethic I think is inspiring, but also the fact that he just, even like Eyes Wide Shut, like he just saw a project through for that long, and it took that long for him to actually, I mean, it killed him.
Yeah.
So
it did.
like it killed him. But like, I mean, I don't know what killed him, but like he died very soon after making it. And like, I don't know. That's a whole other, conspiracy or whatever. But
he was going to reveal that he did do the moon landing, and they were like, we won't have that.
Yeah.
We're going to,
Well, yeah. I mean, part of Eyes Wide Shut is like, I think some people interpret it as exposing the Illuminati and that kind of thing. And I don't know if that was his intention, but he definitely rubbed shoulders with some dangerous people. And I think he was trying to not necessarily expose people in particular, but I think when you look at Eyes Wide Shut and then you compare it to like the Epstein stuff and like all that, you're like, probably knew what was going on,
Probably. I mean, he was a history buff, and history repeats itself. You probably just saw it.
Well, he also, I think, all that stuff was probably happening while he was alive.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to something you said, though, about holding on to that creative instinct and following it through, and what Rick Rubin said about, getting to the finish line and wanting to. I've been there. On our second short film, 4 Pins, I literally said to my producing partners, I was like, yeah, I think we need to get rid of this.
Yeah.
And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, we
get rid of the whole film?
Yeah. I was like, we can't put this out. And they're like, we're putting it out. And I'm like, all right, I think we need to re-edit it, all of it. And they were both like, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you one day to sit down with Ace, and if you guys can edit to your heart's desire, but if you don't figure it out, we're putting the other version out there. And it's that interesting thing where it's like, yeah, at that point it is all emotions, and like how Kubrick was able to kind of keep that level-headed, logistical side, that rational, I don't know how people do that. Sometimes you get so into it.
I'm a very emotional person, or at least that's what drives me more. I'm less driven by, I think, a rational, detailed plan and analytics. I don't think I'm void of logic, but I think what really drives me is probably more of a feeling that I have a hard time putting my finger on or describing. That's part of what I love about movies. It's like they're a language that you can't. They're saying things you can't say any other way. Right?
Yeah.
Music's the same way. It's like you're like, that captures something that I relate to, but I can't explain it.
What was it, real quick, what was the first movie you remember really sticking with you? I'm asking you to go deep on this one.
The Lion King.
No way. Seriously?
Well, that's just...
You're in good company.
Dude, I grew up, like I said earlier, like I grew up pretty conservative, and like, I was the youngest, and there was a pretty big gap between my brother and I, and so I basically grew up in the 80s, even though I grew up in the 90s, because I'd get all the hand-me-down stuff. And
sure.
So we didn't have a DVD player for the longest time. We had, we had VHS tapes, and, I had a VCR, all through even my teens, and most people, I was getting DVDs when most people were starting to get Blu-rays, and just sort of behind. So we, my parents weren't big on like consumerism and all that stuff, and so I had a few VHS tapes, and I think my neighbors had this big collection, and it was like this. I would go in there, and I felt at home just coming in here. I would go in there and just borrow movies, and I'd pick them out, and I think I borrowed The Lion King a few times, and they bought me a copy. And, I'm like really young, I'm like a kid. And so now this is my movie. And, I had a few other VHS tapes, but I watched The Lion King like 1,000 times when I was a kid. Like I just kept watching it. So it's not like it was like the most, when I think back to like the movies that changed my life where it was so meaningful, I'd probably go in a different direction.
No, that wasn't the question.
That would be more my like teens, you know, when I started really.
Of course, yeah.
Not everybody has this relationship to movies, right? Like maybe you relate to this, but movies sort of help me define my identity in the way I viewed the world and help me play out scenarios of fantasies and play out scenarios of, well, what would it be like to live in that way, and play out scenarios of morality and trying to understand right and wrong, and it shaped how I viewed so much of life. And for a lot of people, it's just like you throw on something and it's entertainment, and I like that too. I like just like schlock, and I like just putting on whatever, and I like not having to pay too much attention, but then I also can't deny the, you know, watching movies help kind of shape who I am in a way. And so in my teens, I think I was really, because I had that sort of more sheltered sort of thing, I would like get movies out of the library, and you know, that's where I started being really figuring out my tastes fully of like what movies do I really love, or they're not just like my neighbor's collection or what somebody happened to buy me. And obviously I would just be like, what's rated R, you know, to like go that route or whatever. Like what's got the most swears and, you know, what's got the most like violence, you know. Fell in love with like war movies at a young age, and, you know, just figuring that out. And for a lot of people, it's just like, I would want to throw something on, you know, before I go to sleep. I'm exhausted. I just want to be entertained. And that's great too. But I think it's cool that it can have both. It can live in both areas. You know?
I like that. That's a really good way of putting it. Nobody so far on the podcast has kind of put it through that way. And I do have that relationship to it as well. Yeah. I probably should have stopped watching Goodfellas at a much earlier age, because I think I picked up some of those bad habits. You know, those more, you talk about the moral right and wrong. It's like, whew, spent enough time with Ray Liotta in that movie, and it's like, he'll be making some bad fucking decisions.
Well, I mean, ultimately, that movie is so much fun in the beginning and throughout, and then obviously ultimately has the
tragedy,
right? Has like a moral by the end, but that's not what you remember. You don't remember the ending.
Remember, you know, him going through the back door at the Copacabana and getting up front, and you know, champagne and the table being brought.
Oh yeah, well, and I, you know, when I'm Italian, so I have people in my family who remind me of characters in that movie, and my dad basically looks like Joe Pesci. So watching that as a young age, I was just like, great. You know, like feel right at home here. Yeah. I mean, I love that gray area. You know, I love Sopranos and Breaking Bad and all those kind of stories. That sort of exploration of the shadow self or whatever. If you want to talk about it in like the Carl Jung idea or whatever. I think that's true. I think we have that dark side to us, and like, are you going to explore that in real life? Or are you going to explore that in film? It's like people think that if you watch these dark movies that it like affects you, it can affect you negatively, but I think it's the exact opposite. I think it's a catharsis. Yeah. I feel that same way with aggressive music. Oh, so people listen to the stuff that I make or listen to sometimes. I'm like, how can you, you know, and it's like, where else am I going to get this?
You just got to go somewhere.
I'm an animal. I need to like, you know, and like that it's, but I'm also a productive member of functioning society, and you gotta have that catharsis, and not everybody feels that way maybe, but like I like really like violent movies, and I like really aggressive music, but I also like really like laid back and beautiful patient things, and I like, you know, a lot of ambience. It's like if I can, you know, find where I am and find a story or a movie that kind of like matches that sort of feeling, or a music that matches that feeling, it's like it's satisfying. You can kind of almost create your own little world, you know. Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about your work history, we've talked about your music, we've talked about your creative interests. We've also talked about the first movie that left an impression. Looking towards the future.
Lion King, yeah.
Yeah. But looking towards the future.
It's not a cool answer, but it's the real
No,
answer.
it's the best answer because honestly, that's mine as well.
Come on.
No, I'm dead serious. I remember, like, I shouldn't remember this because apparently I was too young to have memories or whatever, so I'm told. Whatever, fuck them. I remember sitting in the theater with a big bucket of popcorn with my grandparents, and it was The Lion King.
Well, and how old were you?
I couldn't tell you. It was probably like 3, maybe.
Yeah, you can have memories at 3.
Fair enough. So I remember it, and I was sitting there with a big bucket of popcorn, and my grandfather was on my right side, my grandmother was on my left, and my parents were the next 2 seats down. And we were in Pennsylvania because that's where they were from. And that was the thing you did there. You go to the movies.
Yeah.
There's nothing else to do in Lehigh, Pennsylvania, in the middle of the mountains. So yeah, I remember it. So I'm not pulling your leg when I say that.
No, I know. It's just kind of, I'm just laughing at
It's funny coincidence.
Yeah.
But so we talked about all that, and now I'm curious. I mean, looking towards the future, you've got this opportunity with Animus, but like on a more creative level, do you see yourself maybe taking that step, with this renewed inspiration to work on that next thing? And
well, this is something I didn't mention too. Is part of what drew me to Animus is the fact that they have kind of their own passion projects that they produce, and that was always something that I was interested in. Can I have my cake and eat it too? Can I do the quote unquote either corporate stuff and then also put my creative passions into something that's passion projects or whatever. And so that is something they do. And so I'm personally hoping, like, I'm new there, so I'm not coming in there like guns a-blazing, like, I got all these scripts, let's go.
Yeah.
But that is something I have on like the short term in my mind. And me and Josh Kirk are going to start like meeting and talking about how to make that stuff happen, because he's actually invested in that stuff and gotten things made. And I anyone who's gotten something made and it's pretty good, I'm like, hell yeah, like that's amazing. It's hard enough to get something made, and if it's halfway decent, it's like
that's a success.
It's like, oh my god, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And like I'm actually glad I haven't made a movie yet, because like I know they wouldn't have been very good, and like but the intention was there, and like maybe the script was good, but there's so many things that can go wrong. So in the short term, I'm really excited to invest in those kind of things with Animus, and like and just being a new kind of flow and like a new team. And like I mean I moved down here, like I was living in Worcester, like a lot's changed in my life. I'm now like a full-time Rhode Islander, so I've just been sort of like getting settled, but then as far as to answer your question more specifically, as far as like what I want to do with film next, is I think I want to actually try to finish one of my scripts and just really ask myself what I want to say with it. Because if I'm honest about that and it truly means something to me, then I can't not make it. But if I'm wishy-washy on that, then I'm not going to do it, because I know myself. At this point, it's like, yeah, you just don't want it bad enough, and that's the hard truth sometimes. But if I obsess about something enough, I'm gonna do it. And so I'm trying to sort of fall in love with a couple of my old scripts, and one of them has not, for the last probably like 4 years since the pandemic, I haven't fallen out of love with it, and it is doable. And so it is a feature film, but I could do it as a short to start. And I think that'd probably be my, if it were up to me, and money and time was no object, it's probably what I would make. Even if someone gave me a huge budget, I'd probably still want to make this idea, which is I think fairly simple, fairly character driven, and yeah. It's like basically about a guy who breaks into people's houses.
Okay.
And doesn't steal anything, but it's his way of connecting with humanity, because he's highly detached, but he's really good at putting on a face. And so he's sort of like a he could be a master burglar,
Mm-hmm.
but instead he just breaks into homes, and that results in him stumbling upon some interesting findings.
Okay.
And then he has to choose of whether he gets involved in
Sure.
people's personal lives or not. And he does. And it gets really dark.
That sounds fun. That
Yeah.
sounds fun. I'd be
It's
interested to
something
read
that I would want to watch, and it's just an idea I had during the pandemic. I would walk around empty neighborhoods and kind of fantasize about breaking into people's houses, but not like wanting to mess with anything, just kind of curious.
Yeah.
And I felt really detached from everyone, and that would be my way of feeling close to people.
Sure.
And just kind of looking at their family photos, and it's like really creepy.
Yeah.
Like, it's a creepy thought, but I had that thought and I started to laugh, and I was like, that's a movie.
Let me see where this can go.
Yeah, like that could go somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's something that I would want to make. And, it's really not about the breaking and entering. It's just sort of that's kind of like how
that's the vehicle in so that you
that's
can
where the
start
idea
to...
came from, and that's how it started. And also, like, that's just something I would want to watch.
Yeah.
I don't know, like something like that would pull me in, and I don't know if it would pull everyone in, but
We've got my attention. That's for sure. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. Seriously. I hope that something comes of that. I hope you stick with it, because that's an interesting idea. And there's as I'm sure you're in the process of meeting now that you're at Animus, there's a great talented group of people around here in Rhode Island and obviously in the Massachusetts area. So
yeah,
I would love to see you get it made.
I'm finding that like, it's already a small world with like Boston, Massachusetts, New England filmmaking.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Rhode Island feels like very close knit, and there's a lot of talented people here, and
a lot of great locations too. A lot of great
amazing locations. I mean, Providence doesn't get enough attention.
No.
In just filmmaking in general. Like, I'm surprised Worcester gets a lot of attention now.
Worcester's great for filming, but Providence is great for filming too. But whenever people,
I don't know of many things that are filmed here though.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
I think. How do I want to phrase this? Providence doesn't get utilized enough, and when it does get utilized, they go to your stereotypical places like Federal Hill or the Capitol or like Brown. But like, there's so many other amazing locations here in Providence. I'm not going to give away my hand right now, but yeah, I mean,
yeah, you probably got them jotted down.
Well, so in the film industry, when the writing, directing, that's like a side thing. But when I work in the film industry, and I'm a locations manager, so
there you go.
It's all about cultivating different places to film.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should take a tour sometime. I'll show you some cool spots. Maybe you'll get inspiration.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I mean. Yeah, I feel like we've probably already gone over time, but I feel like there's so many questions I want to ask you about your experiences. And I mean, I know I have long answers to everything, so it takes
No, it's all good. I'm really happy that you stopped by the podcast. It was really nice getting to know you. I didn't really know what this conversation was going to be or where it was going to go, but you're very awesome to talk to.
Oh, thanks, man.
I've loved listening to, kind of your story about how you got your creative inspiration and where you've been. So seriously, after this is all done, let's, keep talking, and I'd be happy to share my stuff with you. And, I'm not forcing this, but if you ever need eyes on a script, or if you ever want to bounce around ideas, I'm definitely available. So keep me in mind.
I appreciate it, man. Yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks. This is fun.
Where can people find your music? Where can people find your work? I know you've got your website.
So I mean, you could do so my website's kind of long, but so I would say my Instagram has like links out to a lot of different things. It's a Canine Car Crash on Instagram, and my website is michaeljoshuapalumbo.com, because I have the same name as a lot of other people.
You do.
Michael Joshua Palumbo is a very popular name. Yeah. And that was the only URL I could get. Wow, I just said URL. Yeah, that was the only what's the term for it?
What?
For
if you hadn't stopped after and said, I just said I wouldn't have thought twice about it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, never mind. That was, no, there's a term for it. But anyway, what? Domain name. Yeah. I guess URL is easier to say, but that was the only one I could get. So yeah, it's like it's very long. But yeah, that's kind of where more of my video stuff is. And then kind of Instagram's more, music and day-to-day stuff. And yeah.
Perfect. Well, everybody check him out. Mike Palumbo, thank you for being here. All
Thank
right.
you.
Take it easy, guys.